And a funny note before we go on, if you ever want to see something amusing, watch people in our general niche and field go out to eat. It's always a race to that best seating, and or if by chance one of us is armed and the other one's not, we generally kind of forgo that to that individual. But
so that's a very common thing. If we travel from a state where it's somewhat restricted to have a firearm to a state where it's a lot more constitutionally friendly, it sometimes is like a nod of like, hey, I know you're carrying today, like you've got the better view. So, but as we go through this conversation and really everything we teach, understand that this is all gray, right? There are very clearly advantages and disadvantages to some of the courses of action that we recommend or that we try to steer you away from. But at the end of the day, you might do everything wrong and be completely fine, and you might do everything right and come out, unfortunately, the target of someone's aggression. So just recognize that these are principles and strategies. They are not absolutes. You can certainly put yourself in a worse position or a best position, but at the end of the day, you have to make that cost-benefit analysis based off the overall scenario. And again, that starts with good situational awareness.
So what's your thoughts on the individuals out there, and maybe even some that are watching this, that say, hey, these guys are paranoid, or that's a paranoid mindset. I don't need to live my life constantly walking, over my shoulder. I don't, you guys are overboard.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's very fair. And I think that one of the most common differentiators between individuals who kind of walk the lifestyle that you and I are familiar with and that we advocate, and those who might feel that it's paranoia, is it's a lack of understanding and maybe even a lack of respect, right? So it's a lack of understanding of how bad things can get, or if you understand how bad they can get, it's a lack of respect for the fact that those bad things can happen to you. Having a special operations background, having a military background in the SERE world, where we spent a great deal of time analyzing case studies and figuring out what is the most terrible thing that we could realistically expect, and then how can we mitigate that. So there is a big difference between being paranoid, which is not what we want. We want you to live a life free of fear, but to do that, you have to respect that there are bad things and bad people out there who will exploit your willingness to ignore them.
Yeah. So I tell you, that type of attitude, the one I described, is a personal aggravation for me. And I find it to be a big problem in our society, and maybe world society in general, but definitely in ours. It's a complacent, irresponsible attitude, and it just doesn't sit well with me. So to be clear, I'm not talking about if you, and I'm not standing on a soapbox preaching. I make mistakes. We can all make mistakes. Sometimes I forget and I lose my situational awareness. I'm talking about that. I'm talking about the person that's like, I don't fucking need that.
This will never happen to me.
And then they're all of a sudden, then when they are a victim, because in contribution to their lack of positive awareness, then it's a big deal, and then we've got to cry about it, or we've got to get help on it. It's just it rubs me wrong, the lack of personal responsibility involved in that kind of statement.
So to that point, kind of a way that I like to tie it in with folks, that if you're doing all the right things, you're investing your money, you're saving your money, you're living within your means, and some sort of global pandemic happens that thrusts you into a position where you don't necessarily have the ability to for your ends to meet, that is completely different than you spending frivolously, racking up credit cards, and then hoping that bankruptcy is just going to relieve you of all your obligation. Both people might find themselves in a similar outcome, but it is the responsibility of every individual to kind of manifest their own destiny to the best of their ability.
And something, I'll hit on that because, and this is kind of going off topic, but it's a point of aggravation for me. I saw the same thing with this pandemic. So I'm a prepper. I've been a prepper for 20 years, and all of a sudden this true pandemic hits. And everyone's concerned. We've got this general cultural preparedness. Hey, everyone's going to buy and everything out. And they've got this prepper mentality for about 2 months. Until Uncle Sam comes, and now most people don't have shit in their cupboards. They don't have anything in there, they haven't learned anything from this. And that also aggravates me. And it kind of goes to that same, I'd say that's the same type of attitude. It's two different kind of topics there. Well, this person gets robbed because they weren't situationally aware. I bet a year later, they're probably still of that same mindset. It might be a little more, PTSD from it. Yeah. But it's just, I don't know, just as you can tell. It's
what is certainly frustrating is having had exposure and a consequence to a risk or a hazard, and then not changing our behavior. Like that's the base understanding of what it means to learn, is to change your behavior resulting from experience. So ideally, you have poor situational awareness or you have lacking situational awareness. Maybe you scare yourself once because somebody got closer to you than you thought, or you hear a story of a family member that was victimized or something, whatever it is that gives you a jolt of understanding of consequence, and you change your behavior, right? So to tie it back in, because it could certainly speak volumes on the mindsets and attitudes and approaches in response to some of what we've seen globally recently, but more specifically to situational awareness, talking about personal electronic devices, points of influence, where I physically am in the environment, kind of a prepper perspective is planned advantages, right? What am I going to intentionally have with me or available to me to influence a situation? And why that's so valuable is that when you're gaining and maintaining situational awareness, the things that you can count on, you can commonly think of these as everyday carry items, those help you reach a more probably appropriate decision from a situational awareness perspective. And that's, hey, I'm about to travel to a state that doesn't allow firearms or that doesn't recognize my concealed carry permit. Well, okay, I am disadvantaged in that perspective, but I can still bring, our knives, something that I can bring there, or our tactical flashlights, something I can bring there, or Kubatons, or any of these less lethal types of tools, something that I can bring. And then also, do I know how to use those? Because a firearm can be just as hazardous to the person who is carrying it if they aren't confident, trained, and prepared to use it. So situational awareness certainly benefits from having planned advantages that help you steer the outcome in the direction you want.
Yep, absolutely. So going back, and for clarity, as I said, it's not about being perfect. It's not about making mistakes. It's about having an attitude that doesn't care. I don't care for those people. Especially, and here's the deal. I've got ignorance. I can accept ignorance, but you can't be so ignorant not to see on the news constantly. And so I don't want to keep going on that, but I want to just make sure that I'm clear. It's not from a soapbox position. It's not making a mistake. It's not getting caught off guard, and it's not victim blaming. That doesn't mean that they should be a victim because they have that attitude. But you haven't done anything to help minimize your chance of victimhood.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
nobody deserves to be victimized. Nobody deserves to be targeted, right?
no, because that's a disgusting world we live in.
I agree in,
Right.
but that is the key, right? These are the realities of the world that we live in, the society we live in, and we can't just wish them away or ignore them away. We have to be aware enough, and you mentioned the news, right? A phenomenal component of situational awareness, particularly when traveling to an unfamiliar area, is to figure out what baseline is. And to do that, it doesn't take very long to jump onto crime statistics for the state or the city or county that you're going to be in, or just look at the local news. I mean, we're talking 5 to 10 minutes before you travel, and you are more equipped and prepared and situationally aware than people who might be living in that environment. So it's not a huge investment of time for a significant return on that investment if it is something that you use to your advantage. But where I also find most people kind of peter out is they get away with it, right? They leave their car running with the door open to drop off something really quickly at the laundromat, and their car isn't stolen, or they don't have lights outside their house, and it doesn't attract somebody that ends up breaking in or causing a home invasion or even just making them uncomfortable, and they never feel that consequence, so that they get lulled into a false sense of security. Their actual perception of the risk decreases, and they treat the scenario as if it isn't as risky as it really is. And that's the important thing, is a threat, a bad guy, is as dangerous to you as they will be if you believe they're dangerous or if you don't believe they're dangerous. So the only thing that changes is how well equipped you are to respond to that. So the head in the sand mentality certainly has this advantage.
The head in the sand mentality is, and what you were describing right there, I would say is not the same either. That's a level of complacency that we can all slip into. As far as you're doing it, and then all of a sudden, hey, this is you get used to. I'm always coming to this daycare. I can run in here with my car running, because you get to a level of complaint, and we can all be guilty of that. And that's those kind of things that you personally, and just in general on this topic. I don't walk around paranoid, but I am constantly measuring risk versus cost to me, if you will, risk versus reward or cost in this case as to what I mean, I could lock myself in my house,
Sure.
never leave, and truly, deeply mitigate the risk of anything happening to me.
Yeah,
That's not the life I want to
Yeah,
live, right?
that's not living, right?
So, but I measure it, but it's nothing for me to turn my car off and, you know, take those keys. But so, you know, that's all a complacency or just a misjudgment. That's different than the attitude I'm describing. Which
I
is,
agree, yeah.
So I don't want to derail on that again. But.
To bring that back to situational awareness, right? We have to be aware of our own attitudes towards certain risks. You know, in an aviation environment, when we both started out, we probably thought differently of risk than we did as we have either retired or we've transitioned to different services and mission sets because that experience, right? But that didn't mean that we didn't deliberately stop and think about, okay, I might have done this a lot of times, but it is still risky, right? Like going to an unfamiliar location or having your kids, you know, with you when you might be a single parent or the only guardian with the kids at the time, the risk goes up, right? Because you're now responsible for a lot more. And if we lose the awareness of how we feel about that, we've actually put ourselves at a disadvantage too. So that situational awareness is not just in the moment, what do I see around me? How are the people dressed? You know, is this environment clean, well lit? It's also, how do I feel today? Am I sick? Do I have some sort of injury from training or sports or whatever that's now disadvantaged me? You know, I might not be at 100% like I normally am too. So taking a good look at yourself before you enter that situation is pretty relevant.
Yeah, and I think, and so, you know, when you watch a video, you know, if you're truly new to this, you know, and you're kind of hearing this, it can probably, I would say, seem overwhelming. Like, oh man, I've got to have a strict methodology and all of this. And it's not. For me, it's not. I don't think it's for you.
No.
At a certain point, it becomes a way of life.
Yep.
But you incorporate these small habits. Every one of you watching this have certain habits. You'll wake up, you maybe go to the restroom, maybe you make your coffee. You incorporate these habits into your daily life. And the same thing with your thought patterns, right? I've got to check email, and I do this in my thoughts, and this is what I'm going to do. It's the same thing. If you get in the habit of a risk mitigation, situationally aware of your environment, it becomes a way of life.
Yeah.
And so you're not walking around paranoid. In fact, I'd say I have a higher level of confidence than most people out there.
Absolutely.
Because I have thought through the risk I'm accepting. And so, you know, and it doesn't come overnight. You know, I'm constantly constantly growing myself, and I've been this way for a long time. So,
Yeah.
but it is just it's, you know, the way you eat a well.
One bite at a time, right?